The sun was blazing down on a small mechanic shop tucked away in the corner of a quiet town. The sign above the garage read, "Turner Auto Repair," in bold, faded letters. Inside, the air smelled of grease, oil, and burnt rubber, a scent that anyone who'd ever stepped foot in a garage would recognize instantly. The place buzzed with activity as mechanics worked on cars lined up like soldiers waiting for their turn. Some were bent under hoods, others rolling out from beneath vehicles smeared with dirt and sweat. In the middle of all this chaos stood the owner of the shop, Charlie Turner. He was a burly man with hands toughened by years of gripping wrenches and twisting bolts. His face was weathered, not just by age but by countless hours spent fixing engines that refused to cooperate. Today, though, Charlie wasn't focused on the usual grind. Instead, he was locked in a tense conversation with one of his biggest clients, a wealthy businessman who had driven into the shop earlier that morning. This guy wasn't your average customer. He owned several factories across the state and drove around in a flashy sports car that cost more than most people's houses combined. The car itself was a marvel of engineering, sleek, black, and polished to perfection. But today it sat lifeless in the middle of the garage floor, refusing to start no matter what the mechanics tried. They had poked, prodded, and tested every inch of the engine, but nothing seemed to work. The businessman leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with a smug expression. His sharp suit looked completely out of place among the oily rags and grimy tools scattered around him. Every now and then, he'd glance at his watch or mutter something under his breath about how much time they were wasting. Finally, after another failed attempt to get the car running, he turned to Charlie with a smirk. "If your team can't figure this out," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "maybe you're not as good as everyone says." His words hit hard, especially because they came from someone who clearly thought money bought expertise. Charlie clenched his jaw, trying to keep his temper in check. He knew better than to let a comment like that slide, but he also couldn't afford to lose such a high-profile client. Then, almost instinctively, the businessman's eyes shifted toward the far corner of the garage. There, crouched beside an old rusted truck, was Charlie's daughter. She wasn't officially part of the crew. She mostly handled paperwork, managed appointments, and occasionally helped with minor repairs. But today, her presence caught the businessman's attention. He tilted his head slightly, studying her as if sizing her up. Then, without missing a beat, he pointed at her and said, "How about her? Can she fix it?" The question hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Tools clattered to the ground and conversations died mid-sentence. All eyes turned to her. Charlie felt his stomach drop. He wanted to tell the businessman off right there, to explain that his daughter wasn't some sideshow act meant to entertain rich clients. But pride got the better of him. If he backed down now, it would look like he didn't trust his own family. So instead, he swallowed his frustration and gestured toward her. "All right, kiddo," he said, his voice low but firm. "Show him what you've got." For a moment, she froze. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the room pressing down on her shoulders. This wasn't just a challenge. It was a dare, a test of whether she belonged here at all. Sure, she'd grown up surrounded by engines and gears, learning bits and pieces from watching her dad and the other mechanics over the years. But she'd never been given a chance like this before. Not with something as complicated and expensive as the shiny sports car sitting in front of her. Still, she took a deep breath and nodded. Slowly, she wiped her hands on a rag and walked over to the car. As she approached, the businessman raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by the whole situation. "Hope you know what you're doing," he quipped, though his tone suggested he expected her to fail miserably. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she circled the car once, taking in its sleek curves and gleaming paint job. Then she opened the hood and peered inside. To most people, the tangled mess of wires, hoses, and metal parts might have looked overwhelming. But to her, it was like staring at a puzzle waiting to be solved. She'd spent countless nights poring over online tutorials, reading manuals, and experimenting with broken-down junkers in her spare time. This wasn't just a hobby for her. It was a passion. And now, finally, she had a chance to prove herself. As she began inspecting the engine, the rest of the garage fell silent. Even the hum of drills and clanking tools seemed to fade into the background. Every move she made was deliberate, calculated. She traced each wire with her fingers, checked connections, and listened closely for any unusual sounds coming from the engine bay. It was clear she knew exactly what she was looking for, even if no one else did. The businessman watched her intently, his initial amusement slowly giving way to curiosity. "Well?" he asked after a few minutes. "Any luck yet?" Without looking up, she replied calmly, "I'll let the car answer that." Her confidence surprised even herself. Deep down, she was nervous, unsure if she'd really be able to crack the problem. But she also knew that backing down wasn't an option. Not now. Not when so much was riding on her performance. For the first time in her life, she realized this wasn't just about fixing a car. It was about proving something to her dad, to the crew, and maybe even to herself. The garage was dead silent except for the faint ticking of cooling metal and the occasional creak of tools being shifted around. All eyes were glued to her as she leaned over the open hood of the luxury sports car, her fingers moving methodically across the engine bay. She didn't rush or fumble. Instead, she worked with a quiet confidence that seemed almost out of place in the chaotic world of wrenches and oil spills. It was as if she'd stepped into her own little bubble, shutting out the pressure and the skeptical stares. She started by examining the basics, checking the battery connections, inspecting the spark plugs, and making sure the fuel lines weren't clogged. These were things any mechanic worth their salt would do first. But when none of those revealed the issue, she moved on to more intricate details. Her hands traced the wiring harness, following each strand like it was a thread in a complex tapestry. The other mechanics exchanged glances, some impressed by her precision, others still waiting for her to hit a wall. Then, something caught her attention, a faint buzzing sound coming from deep within the engine compartment. To most people, it might have sounded like nothing more than background noise easily ignored, but she froze, tilting her head slightly as if trying to isolate the sound. That buzz wasn't normal. It was too high-pitched, too irregular. She grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the cramped space, searching for its source. After a few moments, she spotted it, a tiny sensor tucked away near the fuel injection system. It looked unassuming, almost insignificant compared to the rest of the massive engine, but she knew better. Sensors like these controlled everything: the timing, the airflow, the performance. If this one was faulty, the entire car could shut down. The businessman, who had been leaning casually against the wall, pushed himself upright and walked closer. "What is it?" he asked, his tone laced with skepticism. He clearly expected her to stumble or admit defeat at any moment. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for a multimeter lying on the workbench nearby and began testing the sensor's output. Numbers flashed on the screen, confirming her suspicion. The sensor was sending erratic signals, throwing off the car's computer system and causing it to stall. "Well?" The businessman pressed again, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. This time, she looked up at him, her expression calm but determined. "It's the sensor," she said simply, holding up the small component between her thumb and forefinger. "This is what's keeping your car from starting." A murmur rippled through the garage. Some of the older mechanics nodded knowingly, while others exchanged surprised looks. Even the businessman raised an eyebrow, though he quickly masked his reaction with a dismissive shrug. "All right, so you found the problem," he said. "But can you fix it?" Fixing it, however, wasn't going to be as straightforward as swapping out the part. She explained that the real issue went deeper than just the sensor itself. The car's onboard computer, the brain of the vehicle, had likely stored corrupted data due to the faulty readings. Simply replacing the sensor wouldn't solve the underlying glitch. What the car needed was a complete software reset and recalibration, and that required skills far beyond basic mechanical repairs. At this point, the businessman's smirk faltered. He glanced around the room, expecting someone else to step in and take over, but no one moved. Everyone was either too intimidated or too curious to see how this would play out. Finally, he turned back to her and gestured toward the car. "Fine," he said. "Do whatever you need to do, but don't waste my time." She nodded, unfazed by his impatience. Rolling up her sleeves, she retrieved a laptop from the corner of the garage, a device she often used for tinkering with old cars during her free time. Most of the mechanics had never seen anyone use a computer in the shop before, let alone connect it directly to a car. They gathered around, whispering among themselves as she plugged the laptop into the diagnostic port located beneath the dashboard. As the screen lit up with lines of code, the businessman leaned in, his curiosity getting the better of him. "You know how to read all that?" he asked, pointing at the jumble of numbers and letters scrolling across the monitor. She gave him a quick glance and replied without missing a beat, "I've spent enough nights staring at screens like this to figure it out." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating through menus and submenus until she found the section responsible for managing the car's fuel system. She identified the corrupted files and began rewriting them, line by line. It was painstaking work, requiring absolute focus. One wrong keystroke could brick the entire system, rendering the car useless. But she didn't hesitate. Every command she entered was precise, every adjustment deliberate. The tension in the room was palpable. Some of the mechanics watched in awe, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Others remained skeptical, convinced that she'd eventually hit a snag and call for help. Meanwhile, the businessman alternated between checking his watch and pacing back and forth, his earlier arrogance giving way to growing unease. He hadn't expected her to actually make progress, let alone tackle something as technical as reprogramming a car's computer. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 45 minutes, she leaned back and exhaled deeply. Her face was flushed, her hair damp with sweat, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. She closed the laptop and unplugged it from the car, then stood up and wiped her hands on a rag. Turning to the businessman, she said confidently, "Try it now." For a moment he hesitated. His pride battled with his doubt, but eventually he slid into the driver's seat. The entire garage fell silent once again as he turned the key in the ignition. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a smooth rumble, the engine roared to life. It sounded stronger, cleaner, and more powerful than ever before. The businessman's jaw dropped as he revved the engine a couple of times, testing its responsiveness. It purred like a well-fed cat, leaving no trace of the problems that had plagued it earlier. Cheers erupted from the mechanics, breaking the stunned silence. Tools clanged together in celebration, and someone even whistled loudly. The businessman climbed out of the car, shaking his head in disbelief. For once he was speechless. He looked at her, then at Charlie, then back at her again. "How did you—" he started, but trailed off, unable to finish the question. She shrugged modestly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Just doing my job," she said with a small smile. But inside she felt a surge of pride unlike anything she'd ever experienced. This wasn't just about fixing a car. It was about proving to herself and everyone else that she belonged here, in this greasy, noisy, wonderful world of engines. And the garage buzzed with energy after the sports car roared back to life. The mechanics who had been skeptical just hours ago were now clapping her on the back, offering grins and nods of approval. Even the older ones, the seasoned pros who prided themselves on decades of experience, couldn't hide their admiration. One of them, a grizzled man with grease stains tattooed into his skin, shook his head and muttered, "Never thought I'd see the day a kid like you outsmarted all of us." His words weren't condescending. They carried a kind of respect that made her chest swell with pride. The businessman stood beside his car, still looking stunned. He ran his hand along the hood as if checking to make sure it was real. Then, without warning, he turned to her and said, "You're good, really good." It wasn't a compliment tossed lightly. It came from someone who didn't seem used to handing out praise. For a moment she thought he might leave it at that. But instead he pulled out a business card from his pocket and held it out to her. "If you ever want to trade this place for something bigger, give me a call." She blinked in surprise, glancing at the card before taking it. The name printed on it belonged to one of the largest manufacturing companies in the region. They were known for designing cutting-edge machinery, the kind of stuff that pushed boundaries and redefined industries. A job offer like this could change everything, open doors she hadn't even dared to dream about. And yet, as tempting as it sounded, she already knew her answer. "Thanks," she said, tucking the card into her pocket. "But this is where I belong, for now at least." Her voice was steady, but there was a flicker of emotion in her eyes when she glanced over at her dad, who was watching the scene unfold with a mix of awe and pride. Charlie hadn't said much since she fixed the car, but the way he looked at her now spoke volumes. This shop wasn't just a business to him, it was home. And she wasn't ready to walk away from that. Not yet. Still, she didn't turn down the opportunity entirely. When the businessman offered to send more high-end vehicles to the shop for repairs and hinted at potential partnerships involving custom modifications, she accepted graciously. After all, these deals would bring in steady work and put Turner Auto Repair on the map in ways no one had imagined. By the time the businessman finally drove off in his gleaming sports car, the mood in the garage had shifted completely. What had started as a tense standoff ended with laughter, backslaps, and plans for celebration. Word spreads like wildfire. It didn't take long for word of what happened to spread beyond the walls of the garage. Customers who walked in the next morning brought snippets of gossip they'd heard at coffee shops or gas stations. "Did you hear? That fancy car broke down here, and some girl fixed it using a laptop." The stories grew wilder with each retelling, until some versions claimed she'd hacked into NASA-level tech to get the engine running again. While most of it was exaggerated nonsense, the core truth remained. Someone young, unassuming, and underestimated had solved a problem that stumped even the experts. Local news outlets caught wind of the story too. Within days, reporters showed up at the shop, microphones in hand and cameras rolling. At first, Charlie tried to shoo them away, muttering about how they were disrupting the workflow. But she stepped forward, calm and composed, and agreed to an interview. She figured if people were going to talk about her anyway, she might as well tell the story herself. Standing in front of the garage bay, surrounded by tools and half-dismantled engines, she spoke plainly but passionately. "I didn't do anything special," she told the reporter, shrugging modestly. "I just paid attention to details others might have missed. Anyone can learn to fix cars or anything else if they put their mind to it." Her words resonated deeply, not because they were groundbreaking, but because they came from someone who genuinely believed them. The interview aired that evening, and by the next day, the phone at Turner Auto Repair was ringing nonstop. People called to book appointments, ask questions, or simply congratulate the team on their newfound fame. Some customers drove hours just to meet her, eager to shake hands with the mechanic's daughter who dared to take on the impossible. Others sent emails asking for advice on troubleshooting their own vehicles. Overnight, the small-town garage became a beacon of inspiration, drawing attention from far beyond its humble beginnings. Breaking stereotypes, one workshop at a time. As the weeks went by, life at the shop settled into a new rhythm. Business boomed, and the crew worked harder than ever to keep up with demand. But amidst the chaos, she found time to focus on something that mattered deeply to her: teaching. Growing up, she'd often felt like an outsider in the world of mechanics. Most of the people she looked up to were older men who seemed born with wrenches in their hands. There weren't many women, or young people for that matter, who shared her passion. So, she decided to change that. Every Saturday morning, she hosted free workshops for teenagers interested in learning about cars. She set up a corner of the garage with foldable chairs, a whiteboard, and a beat-up old sedan she'd picked up for cheap. The kids who showed up ranged from curious beginners to budding gearheads, but they all had one thing in common: a desire to understand how things worked. She taught them the basics, how to change oil, replace brake pads, and diagnose simple issues, but also encouraged them to think creatively. "Don't be afraid to experiment," she'd say. "Sometimes the best solutions come from breaking the rules." Her father watched these sessions with quiet admiration. He'd always seen her as his helper, the girl who kept the books balanced and made sure the coffee pot was full. But now he saw her in a different light, as a leader, a teacher, and someone capable of carrying the legacy of Turner Auto Repair forward. On more than one occasion, he joined the workshops, sharing tips and tricks he'd learned over decades in the trade. Together, they created a space where knowledge flowed freely, and no question was too silly to ask. A new chapter begins. With the shop thriving and her reputation growing, she began to think about the future. The businessman's offer lingered in the back of her mind, not as a temptation but as a reminder of how far she'd come. She realized she didn't need to choose between staying true to her roots and pursuing bigger dreams. They weren't mutually exclusive. Instead, she found ways to merge the two. She started collaborating with local schools and community centers, giving talks about the importance of STEM education and encouraging young people to explore careers in engineering and mechanics. She even reached out to the businessman, proposing a partnership to develop affordable diagnostic tools for smaller repair shops. To her delight, he agreed, impressed by her vision and determination. These projects kept her busy, but they also fueled her passion in ways she hadn't anticipated. One evening, as she locked up the shop after another long day, her father walked up beside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. "You've made me proud, kiddo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled, feeling a lump rise in her throat. For so long, she'd craved his approval, hoping to prove that she was more than just the mechanic's daughter. Now, standing here under the dim glow of the garage lights, she finally understood that she'd earned something even greater: his trust. And as she climbed into her truck and drove home, she couldn't help but feel grateful for the challenges that had shaped her, for the people who believed in her, and for the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The transformation of Turner Auto Repair wasn't just about the shiny new tools or the steady stream of high-profile clients. It was deeper than that. It was about the people who walked through its doors and left feeling inspired, empowered, or simply grateful for a job well done. The garage had always been more than just a place to fix cars. It was a hub of stories, struggles, and triumphs. And now, with her at the helm of innovation, it became something even greater: a symbol of resilience and possibility. A new kind of reputation. Word of mouth worked wonders in their small town. Neighbors talked over fences, friends chatted during coffee breaks, and customers shared glowing reviews online. Before long, Turner Auto Repair wasn't just known as the go-to spot for reliable fixes. It was becoming famous for pushing boundaries. People came not only because they trusted the work, but also because they wanted to see what made this shop different. Some were curious about the laptop mechanic they'd heard so much about, while others were drawn by the promise of cutting-edge solutions for stubborn problems. One customer rolled in with an old pickup truck that hadn't run in years. Its engine was practically held together by rust and duct tape, and most mechanics would have suggested scrapping it altogether. But when she saw the look in the owner's eyes, a mix of desperation and nostalgia, she couldn't bring herself to give up on it. Over the next few days, she and the crew dismantled the entire thing, piece by piece, cleaning parts, replacing worn-out components, and rebuilding it from the ground up. When the engine fired up again, sounding smoother than it probably ever had in its life, the owner teared up. "This truck was my dad's," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't think anyone could save it." Moments like these reminded everyone why they did what they did. It wasn't just about fixing machines. It was about preserving memories, solving problems, and making lives a little easier. Every car that left the shop carried a piece of their effort, their care, and their pride. Custom creations take center stage. As the shop gained traction, they started getting requests that went beyond standard repairs. Customers began asking for custom modifications: turbocharged engines, upgraded suspensions, unique paint jobs, and advanced sound systems. At first, the team hesitated. Custom work required time, creativity, and resources they weren't sure they had. But she saw it as an opportunity to grow, both personally and professionally. She dove into research, studying designs and techniques used by top-tier performance shops. She spent late nights sketching ideas, calculating horsepower gains, and testing configurations on junkyard cars she bought for cheap. Slowly but surely, she developed a knack for turning ordinary vehicles into extraordinary ones. One project stood out, a beat-up muscle car, brought in by a young man saving up for college. He dreamed of restoring it to its former glory, but didn't have the budget for a full-blown restoration. Instead of turning him away, she proposed a compromise. They'd focus on key upgrades that would make the car look and feel impressive without breaking the bank. The result was stunning. They stripped the body down to bare metal, gave it a fresh coat of midnight blue paint, and installed a rebuilt engine with just enough power to turn heads. When the young man saw his car for the first time, he nearly fell over. "I can't believe this is mine," he stammered, circling the vehicle like it might disappear if he blinked. Later, he told them how driving that car gave him confidence, a reminder that hard work and determination could pay off in unexpected ways. Stories like his spread quickly, attracting more enthusiasts eager to transform their rides. Soon, custom projects became a staple of the shop, bringing in revenue and cementing its reputation as a place where dreams took shape. Collaboration opens doors. Her partnership with the businessman evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. What started as a simple agreement to handle high-end repairs turned into a collaborative effort to innovate. Together, they worked on developing affordable diagnostic tools designed specifically for smaller garages. These devices were compact, user-friendly, and packed with features typically found only in expensive equipment used by luxury dealerships. The project challenged her in ways she hadn't expected. She spent hours poring over technical manuals, consulting engineers, and troubleshooting prototypes. There were setbacks, moments when nothing seemed to work, and frustration threatened to take over. But she persisted, driven by the belief that these tools could level the playing field for mechanics everywhere. When the final product launched, it received rave reviews from industry professionals and hobbyists alike. For the first time, even the smallest repair shops could access technology that once felt out of reach. Seeing the impact of her work reinforced her commitment to helping others succeed. She traveled to trade shows, giving presentations and hosting workshops to teach mechanics how to use the new tools effectively. Attendees often approached her afterward, thanking her for making their jobs easier and sharing stories of how the equipment had transformed their businesses. Each interaction reminded her why she loved what she did, not for the recognition, but for the difference it made in people's lives. Inspiring the next generation. While the shop thrived, she never lost sight of her original goal: inspiring young people to pursue careers in mechanics and engineering. Her Saturday workshops grew in popularity, drawing kids from all walks of life. Some came because they loved cars, others attended out of curiosity, or because a teacher recommended it. Regardless of their reasons, she welcomed them with open arms, creating an environment where everyone felt valued and encouraged. One boy, barely 13, stood out among the regulars. He showed up every week, armed with questions and a notebook filled with sketches of imaginary engines. At first, he was shy, hesitant to speak up during group discussions. But she noticed his enthusiasm and took him under her wing, teaching him the basics and encouraging him to experiment. By the end of the summer, he'd built his own miniature engine using spare parts scavenged from the shop. Watching him light up when it sputtered to life for the first time was one of the most rewarding moments she'd experienced. Her father watched these interactions with quiet admiration. He'd always believed in passing down skills, but seeing his daughter inspire others in such a profound way filled him with pride. On several occasions, he joined the workshops, sharing tales of his own early days in the trade. Their combined efforts created a bridge between generations, united everyone through a shared love of learning and problem-solving. A legacy in the making. Months passed, and the changes at Turner Auto Repair continued to unfold. The shop, expanded, adding a second bay and hiring new staff to keep up with demand. Photos of restored cars and happy customers lined the walls, each one telling a story of perseverance and teamwork. In the corner of the office, a framed picture hung prominently, a snapshot of her standing beside the sleek sports car that had started it all. To anyone else, it might have looked like just another trophy. To her, it represented something far greater, proof that courage, curiosity, and hard work could overcome even the toughest challenges. One evening, as she sat at the workbench reviewing plans for an upcoming project, her father joined her. He pulled up a stool and sat quietly for a moment, watching her scribble notes and adjust measurements. Finally, he spoke. "You've changed this place," he said softly. "Not just the shop, but the way people think about us, about you." She paused, looking up at him. "We did it together," she replied, smiling. And in that moment, she realized the truth of her words. This journey wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had supported her, challenged her, and believed in her along the way. As she closed her notebook and switched off the lights, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The sun was setting over the small town, casting long shadows across the parking lot of Turner Auto Repair. Inside the garage, the hum of activity had slowed to a gentle rhythm as the crew wrapped up another busy day. Tools were being wiped clean and hung back on their racks, oil-stained rags tossed into bins and cars pushed back into their designated spots. But despite the quieting pace, there was an undeniable energy in the air, a sense that something bigger than all of them was unfolding. For years, the shop had been her father's domain, a place where he poured his sweat, blood, and soul into keeping it afloat. She had grown up watching him work late nights, troubleshoot impossible problems, and argue with stubborn customers who didn't understand why quality repairs took time. Back then, she'd felt like an outsider looking in, someone who helped out but never truly belonged. But now, standing shoulder to shoulder with him, she realized how much had changed. The garage wasn't just his anymore. It was theirs. Her. Dad seemed to feel it too. He no longer barked orders or hovered over every decision she made. Instead, he trusted her judgment, letting her take the lead when complicated jobs came in. Sometimes he'd even step aside entirely, content to watch her handle things on her own. It wasn't always easy for him. Old habits die hard, but seeing the pride in his eyes whenever she solved a tough problem made it worth it. Their partnership had evolved into something deeper, a shared mission to keep the shop thriving while helping others along the way. The rest of the crew had also warmed up to her leadership. At first, some of the older mechanics had grumbled about taking orders from the boss's kid, but after witnessing her skills firsthand and benefiting from the influx of business she brought in, they began treating her as an equal. They joked with her during lunch breaks, asked for her advice on tricky repairs, and even started calling her boss in jest. It was a title she hadn't sought, but one she wore with quiet confidence. As word of the shop's success spread, so did its impact on the community. People weren't just coming for repairs. They were stopping by to chat, share stories, or simply say thank you. One elderly woman dropped off homemade cookies every Friday, claiming they were payment for fixing her car months ago. A local farmer brought fresh produce as gratitude for getting his tractor running again before harvest season. Even kids from the neighborhood would peek through the garage doors, fascinated by the sight of engines being torn apart and rebuilt. She embraced these connections, knowing that the shop's role extended far beyond fixing vehicles. It was a lifeline for many, a place where problems could be solved, burdens lightened, and dreams supported. When a struggling single mother brought in her car, worried about affording repairs, she arranged a payment plan without hesitation. When a teenager saved up for months to buy his first car, only to find it barely ran, she spent extra hours ensuring it was safe and reliable. These acts of kindness might not have shown up on balance sheets, but they mattered more than any profit margin ever could. Her efforts rippled outward, inspiring others to give back in their own ways. Local businesses donated supplies, teachers recommended students for internships, and volunteers pitched in during charity events hosted at the shop. What started as a simple mechanic's garage had become a cornerstone of the community, a reminder that even the smallest actions could spark meaningful change. Despite the shop's growth, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to do. Her collaboration with the businessman had opened her eyes to possibilities beyond the confines of the garage. Together, they continued refining diagnostic tools, expanding their reach to underserved areas where mechanics struggled to access modern technology. Each new iteration brought them closer to their goal, leveling the playing field for repair shops everywhere. But her ambitions didn't stop there. She dreamed of creating a training program for aspiring mechanics, offering hands-on experience alongside classroom instruction. She envisioned partnerships with schools, scholarships for underprivileged students, and mentorship opportunities for young women entering male-dominated fields. Some days, the sheer scope of her ideas overwhelmed her. Other days, she reminded herself that progress came one step at a time, and she was already well on her way. One evening, as she sat at the workbench sketching plans for the program, her father walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and pulled up a stool, studying the notebook in front of her. "What's this?" he asked, pointing to a diagram of what looked like a classroom setup inside the expanded section of the shop. "It's an idea," she said, sipping her coffee. "A way to teach people everything we know. Not just how to fix cars, but how to think critically and solve problems." He nodded thoughtfully, tracing the lines of the drawing with his finger. "You've got the vision," he said after a moment, "and I've got the space. Let's make it happen." Her heart swelled at his words. For so long she'd carried the weight of her dreams alone, unsure if anyone else believed in them. Hearing her father's support meant more than she could put into words. With his backing and the enthusiasm of the crew, they began laying the groundwork for the program, reaching out to educators, industry professionals, and potential sponsors. Months later, the training program launched with a small group of eager participants. They ranged in age and background, from high school students exploring career options to adults seeking a fresh start. Every day she watched them grow more confident, tackling challenges they once thought impossible. One student, a shy girl who barely spoke during the first week, surprised everyone by diagnosing a complex electrical issue faster than anyone else. Another, a retired factory worker learning a new trade, built a custom exhaust system that left seasoned mechanics impressed. These moments reminded her why she loved teaching almost as much as fixing cars. There was something magical about watching someone discover their potential, overcome self-doubt, and realize they were capable of greatness. It was a feeling she understood intimately, one she hoped to pass on to as many people as possible. Graduation day. She stood at the front of the room addressing the first cohort of graduates. "This isn't the end," she told them, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's just the beginning. Take what you've learned here and use it to build something amazing, not just for yourselves, but for the people around you." As applause erupted and cameras flashed, she stepped back, letting the moment sink in. This was what legacy meant, not fame or fortune, but the ability to inspire others to create their own paths. And in that crowded room, surrounded by smiling faces and heartfelt hugs, she knew she'd found hers. That night, as she locked up the shop and climbed into her truck, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The road ahead was uncertain, full of challenges and opportunities yet unseen, but she wasn't afraid. She had her family, her team, and a community that believed in her. Most importantly, she had the knowledge that no matter what happened, she'd already made a difference. Driving home under a starlit sky, she smiled to herself. The journey wasn't over. It was just getting started, and she couldn't wait to see where it would take her next.